In this lesson we're going to continue to look at the stopping distance. In the last lesson we learnt that the stopping distance is the sum of the thinking distance plus the braking distance. In the last lesson we had a close look at the braking distance and what factors affected the braking distance. In this lesson we're going to look at what factors affect the thinking distance. Okay, let's just remind ourselves what these distances actually are. So the overall stopping distance, which we'll call D, is equal to the thinking distance plus the braking distance. So what is the thinking distance? Well, the thinking distance is the distance that the car travels in between the moment that the driver sees a situation arise, an imminent danger for example, and the moment that he or she starts to apply the brakes. The braking distance is then the distance that the car travels before it stops once those brakes have been applied. Okay, so what factors affect the thinking distance? Well, I'm going to do a little experiment with you now. What you're going to imagine is that you're driving this car and you've got to have your 2 feet at the ready, okay, and almost certainly none of you have actually driven a car yet if you're doing your GCSEs. But what happens is when you brake is you've got to slam the clutch down with your left foot and apply your right foot to the brake pedal. So you've got to have both feet up in the air, and then as soon as you see a pedestrian you've got to push both feet down, okay, left onto the clutch, right onto the brake pedal, and we'll see how you get on. Okay, you ready? The pedestrian could come at any moment. There. How did you get on? Well, what you just experienced then was the thinking time. That's to say, the time taken between seeing the pedestrian and slamming your brake pedals down, okay? And that thinking time, or reaction time, if you like, affects the thinking distance. So what is the thinking distance equal to? In that period of time between you seeing this pedestrian and slamming the brakes down, the car travelled the thinking distance, which is equal to the velocity of the car multiplied by your reaction time or thinking time. So what affects this thinking distance? Well, clearly the first thing, as with the braking distance, is the velocity of the car. But remember that the braking distance depended on v squared. That's to say it was a quadratic relationship. If you double the speed, then the braking distance increases by 4 times. In terms of the thinking distance, this is a linear relationship. Okay, you'll notice that here. If you look at the blue thinking distances here, that I can draw a straight line through the tips of those arrows. That is a linear relationship. That means if I double the speed of the car, then I've got to double the thinking distance. Okay, if I treble the speed of the car, then I treble the thinking distance. Okay, so it depends upon the speed of the car. The second factor that it depends upon is the thinking time. What affects the thinking time, or the reaction time? Well, this could be affected by a number of factors. For example, how tired the driver is. So tiredness can affect your reaction time. So if you've been driving for a long period of time without a rest, then you're going to find it harder to react to a critical situation. Another factor which could affect this thinking time, this reaction time, is whether or not you may be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. It is not recommended that you drink and drive. And it is not recommended that you take drugs full stop, right? Whether you're driving or not whether you're driving. Okay, get that clear. Okay, so being under the influence of alcohol or drugs can affect your reaction time. And the third important factor which can affect your thinking time is that of having some type of distraction. While you're driving a car, you need to be concentrating all the time on what's around you. So any type of distraction could affect your thinking time. For example, listening to loud music, or perhaps a more serious offence such as talking with a mobile phone, particularly if you've got to use your hand to hold the mobile phone. Well, that too can be a distraction and is actually against the law and a punishable offence. So these things can cause distractions which can lengthen the thinking time, which will lengthen the thinking distance, and affect your ability to stop the car in the case of a sudden dangerous situation arising.